Hey there, it's CJ Willie and I'm cracking a pack. Today is pack number 12 in my science project of cracking a 1990 top Cello box. Check out my preview video for the explanation on how this science project will test the theory to see if I can build a complete set from a Cello box. I've added the link to my 1990 top Cello box preview video in the description below. So with all the packs that I crack, I'm going to share my thoughts and memories about some of the players or cards. After I've cracked the pack, I'm going to choose the best card of the pack. Doesn't mean it has to be a rookie or a superstar or a Hall of Famer. It can be something funny about the photo, something interesting about the player, or maybe some memory I had of the player from back in the day. Okay, let's grab pack number 12. So with this pack, we're going to be halfway through the Cello box. We are, I think, the only rookie that we're missing, chase-wise, I think is Larry Walker. I'd have to go back and kind of track what's been going on so far. So, let's get started. First card, Mookie Wilson. Mookie Wilson came up with the Mets. Spent a good part of his playing career in center field with the Mets. Won a World Series title in 1986. In fact, if I remember correctly, I believe he was, I can't remember if he was at the plate and hit the ground ball or if he was on second base when Bill Buckner booted it. And either Mookie hit the ground ball or he's on second base. I think Mookie hit the ground ball and Ray Knight was on second base. And Knight came around to score the tying run in the Game 6 of the 1986 World Series. Marty Clary. Don't remember too much about Marty Clary. Probably middle innings relief pitcher with the Braves. Tyler Houston. This card is pretty hot. When he first came up, he was supposed to be the next, superstar for the Braves. It was actually Chipper Jones the next year that was their number one draft pick. But Tyler Houston had a semi-decent career as a backup infielder. I think he may have even spent some time as a catcher as well. So the look at the back of the cards for draft picks, you can see his high school batting record. Obviously, they couldn't figure out or kept track of his freshman and sophomore year. John Smoltz, Hall of Famer. John Smoltz spent almost all of his career with the Braves. He and Dennis Eckersley are the two Hall of Famers who had significant success as starting pitchers and also significant success as relievers. Smoltz spent the last half a year of his career with the Cardinals trying to help them with their playoff run. Doug Jones, reliever with the Indians. He spent the first part of his career as a stopper and then the later part of his career as a middle innings reliever, setup sort of guy. Turn back the clock, Johnny Bench. So going back to the 1970 Topps design, Johnny Bench, Hall of Fame catcher. Jody Reed, utility infielder. I believe, if I remember right, he spent time with both the Expos and the Red Sox. Dave West, left-handed pitcher, came up as a starter, but spent a good portion of his career as a reliever. Greg Harris, spent time with, I believe, the Red Sox and Rangers. Had some time as a starter, but was mainly a mop-up, back into the rotation guy. Dave Leeper, pitcher with the Padres. I don't remember too much about his career. I think he spent some time with the Yankees and the A's. Jeff Parrott came up with the Expos. He was kind of the first wave of what you would call a setup guy. Had a few save opportunities, but was mainly that guy that bridged from starter to closer. Back in the 80s and 90s, it wasn't until Tony La Russa and the A's kind of revolutionized the setup position. Your starters would go 6-7 innings. They'd probably give up 4 or 5 runs and then turn it over to the bullpen. And the stopper, back in the days of Rich Gossage, Wally Finger, Bruce Sutter, Lee Smith, they would pitch 2 to 3 innings to get the save. Vince Coleman, record breaker. Vince Coleman, first, I think 3 years in a row, had over 100 stolen bases in the season. Let's see what the 1989 record breaker said about him. Oh, swipes 50 consecutive bases. That's quite a feat. Stolen base is kind of a lost art nowadays. Not too many players run or teams run. Rick Russell. The memory I have of Rick Russell is the 1989 All-Star Game. Serving up a fat home run to Bo Jackson. Dead center field, blasted it out there. Roberto Alomar, Hall of Famer. Roberto Alomar came up with the Padres. Most of his more offensive years or recognized years came with the Blue Jays and then later on with the Orioles. So a couple of Hall of Famers in this pack already, John Smoltz and Roberto Alomar. Roy Smith, I don't remember much about him. I think he started a few games, but was kind of that mop-up back at the end of the rotation guy. There's our Topps Glossy All-Star and Hot Prospects card. So you'd send away and you would get 10 cards per send away for a total of 60 cards in the set. Bob Melvin, he was a backup catcher with the Orioles and the Giants. Later on became a major league manager with some success. Brady Anderson, he was a decent outfielder, and then all of a sudden he started hitting a lot of home runs around the time of the steroid era, late 90s, early 2000s. Greg Litton, I don't remember much about Greg Linton. I think he was a backup infielder. Mike Jackson, he had a pretty long career, mainly as a setup guy. He came into the league right as the setup position was kind of starting out, and then ended his career right around the time the setup position was pretty viable. He had a few saves here and there, but it was mainly that back end of the bullpen. Jim Lefevre, manager. He spent some of his career as an outfielder, and then later on became a manager. Scott Garrelts, he was part of the 1989 Giants National League pennant winning team. He really blossomed under Roger Craig, who taught him the split-fingered fastball. And in fact, if we look at the back of his card, 89 was a very successful year for him. He led the league in ERA. And as you can see, started out his career more of a reliever, and then in 1989, with the Roger Craig split-finger fastball, he became a pretty successful starter. Mark Thurman began his career with the Padres and then moved over to the Orioles, a starter, and then finished out as a left-handed reliever. Randy Reddy, backup infielder, spent some time with the Brewers and Phillies. Phil Bradley, he was a starter with the Mariners for a number of years. During the time period when the Mariners just couldn't win a game. By the time Ken Griffey Jr. showed up, Bradley had moved on to the Orioles. Manny Lee spent a number of years as a backup infielder with the Blue Jays. Greg Brock, early on in his career was with the Dodgers. He was viewed to be the replacement for Steve Garvey. So Steve Garvey left the Dodgers, went to the Padres. Greg Brock was supposed to fill his shoes. Both Greg Brock and Mike Marshall just couldn't do or produce at the same level as Steve Garvey. Chris James, outfielder with the Phillies and the Padres. Mike Pagliarulo, he came up with the Yankees, was supposed to be their next cornerstone cog, playing third base. He could hit the home runs, but he couldn't hit for average, and he struck out a ton. Joe Morgan, manager with the Red Sox. Willie McGee, one of my favorite Cardinals, absolute favorite Cardinal. In fact, I was devastated because the next year Willie McGee won the batting title, but was traded at the trade deadline to the A's. He qualified for the batting title because he had enough at-bats that if he didn't get a hit during the rest of the year, he would still have a higher batting average than the next closest player. And our final card is another Hall of Famer, Barry Larkin. Barry Larkin spent his entire career with the Cincinnati Reds. He had to wait until Ozzie Smith retired because each year Ozzie Smith was the all-star starter. Once Ozzie retired, Barry picked up that mantle and became a perennial all-star starter in the National League. All right, so favorite card out of the pack. I'm going to avoid trying to be a homer because I think my favorite card is Willie McGee. But for me, my favorite card out of the pack is going to be Tyler Houston. So I remember in 1990, Tyler Houston was a hot commodity. You had your future stars, Todd Zill, Eric Anthony, and Greg Vaughn, who were already in the minor leagues and spent some time in the major leagues. They were the chase cards. Tyler Houston, there was a lot of noise around him. He was supposed to be the next big superstar for the Atlanta Braves. It didn't really pan out. He spent time with the Cubs, as the Braves, never really as a starter, but kind of an off-the-bench guy. But in 1990, my memory of him, this was a hot card to pick up because he was a high draft pick, and he was, like I said, supposed to be that next superstar on the Braves that you could see on TBS every day. Well, it was kind of sort of going to be that way. It wasn't until the next year when Chipper Jones was their #1 draft pick for the Braves, and he did eventually become that superstar Hall of Famer that helped lead the Braves to a bunch of National League pennants. Okay, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did like it, please subscribe and share. Take some time in the comments section. Let me know, what was your favorite card out of the pack? What did you like? Until next time, when I crack pack number 13 for my 1990 Top Cello box, remember, this is for science.